I had always believed that a garden could never hurt anyone. Flowers, colors, life, what harm could that bring? But when my small patch of joy started attracting the wrong kind of attention, I realized that beauty could be seen as rebellion. The HOA claimed I was disturbing the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Those words sounded ridiculous at first, until the fines, the warnings, and the letters began piling up. I thought it was just about flowers. I was wrong. It was about control, power, and how far some people would go to prove they had both. What started as a simple disagreement over a garden would soon turn into a public spectacle that no one in our community would ever forget. For 10 years, I'd lived in the same peaceful cul-de-sac, a little suburban dream where every mailbox looked the same, lawns were trimmed like carpets, and the neighbors waved whether they liked you or not. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed content to live under invisible rules. I had worked hard for this home. It was quiet, safe, and, until recently, predictable. After my wife passed away 3 years ago, gardening became my escape. Planting flowers gave me something to care for again, something that grew despite the silence that filled my house. It started small, roses, daisies, a few bright tulips near the mailbox. But as the seasons passed, my little patch grew into something colorful, almost wild. The neighbors would pass by and smile. Some stopped to chat. Kids took pictures for their school projects. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was adding something good to the world again. Then came the first notice from the HOA. Unauthorized landscape modification. I remember standing there with the paper in my hand, confused. My garden wasn't hurting anyone. It wasn't even near the sidewalk. I thought it had to be a mistake. I called the HOA office, left messages, even sent photos showing that everything was clean and tidy. No one responded. A week later, another letter arrived. This one mentioned fines. That's when I met Linda, the HOA president, a woman whose smile never reached her eyes. She told me, in a tone as polished as her manicure, that my garden disrupted the neighborhood's uniform aesthetic. I tried to explain. This garden was all I had left of my wife, something we had dreamed of doing together. But she only shrugged, saying, "Rules are rules. You agreed to them when you moved here." That phrase would haunt me. At first, I tried to comply. I trimmed back the flowers, removed the decorative stones, even replaced the bright pots with plain ones. But that didn't satisfy them. Every time I made one change, they found another issue. Too tall, too colorful, too close to the sidewalk. It was as if they were determined to erase any trace of individuality. Neighbors began whispering. Some avoided eye contact. Others secretly told me to fight back. One even admitted that Linda had targeted other homeowners before, a flag that was too bright, a mailbox that wasn't regulation beige. She thrived on control. The fines grew steeper. My mailbox filled with threats of legal action, warnings about liens, and urgent notices. I started documenting everything, every letter, every picture, every conversation, because something deep inside me knew that this wasn't just about plants anymore. Weeks turned into months. I appealed the fines, attended the HOA meetings, tried to reason. But at every turn, Linda and her board allies shut me down. They smirked when I spoke. They interrupted when I tried to explain. One man even laughed and said, "If we let you keep this garden, what's next? People painting their houses purple?" The pettiness was astonishing. But what hurt most was the loneliness. Realizing that the community I once loved was turning its back on me, one letter at a time. Then came the day they sent the landscapers, without warning. I came home to find them digging up my flower beds, tossing plants into black garbage bags like trash. My wife's roses, the ones that bloomed every spring since she passed, were uprooted. I shouted, demanded an explanation, but the workers said they were just following HOA orders. That was my breaking point. I stood in the middle of my torn-up yard and promised myself I wouldn't let them win. The breaking point, Daniel's resolve. So I started gathering evidence. Every notice, every photo, every neighbor's testimony. I filed a formal complaint with the county, then another with the state's Homeowners' Rights Board. I reached out to a local journalist known for covering HOA abuses, a man who had once exposed a board that misused funds. He listened, asked questions, and said, "I think people will want to hear your story." When I told Linda that the local news wanted an interview, her composure cracked for the first time. Her confident tone wavered. She told me I'd regret making this public. I told her she'd regret what she'd done to my wife's garden. The next morning, the camera crew arrived. Neighbors peeked from their windows as microphones and tripods filled my yard. The reporter asked me to stand beside the destroyed garden, the place that had once been full of life. I told the story, every word trembling with a mix of pain and anger. I didn't hold back. I explained how I'd been fined, threatened, and humiliated for planting flowers in my own yard. And then something unexpected happened. The neighbors began stepping outside. One by one, they joined me. A mother who'd been fined for her kid's basketball hoop, an elderly man who was told his front step railing wasn't uniform. The more people spoke, the more the cameras rolled. By the time the interview ended, half the cul-de-sac was standing beside me. The HOA's iron grip was starting to crack. But Linda wasn't done. The very next morning, I found a new notice on my door: violation, unauthorized media activity within HOA grounds. It was absurd, even for them. But it showed me something. She was scared. Within days, the story aired on the local news. The headline read, HOA destroys widow's memorial garden, cites rule violations. My phone exploded with messages. Friends I hadn't heard from in years reached out. Strangers offered to help replant. The HOA office, usually so loud in its threats, went completely silent. But silence can be dangerous too. That night, someone slashed my garden hose and left a note in my mailbox: "Stop embarrassing the neighborhood." I reported it to the police, and the officer quietly admitted that this wasn't the first complaint about harassment in my HOA. That gave me the final push I needed. I hired an attorney. Together, we filed a lawsuit against the HOA for damages, harassment, and property destruction. When the summons arrived at the board president's door, Linda's smile was gone. The courtroom was packed the day of the hearing. Neighbors, reporters, even a few HOA members who had grown tired of her tyranny. My lawyer presented everything: the photos, the letters, the fines, the footage of landscapers tearing up my garden. And then he showed the interview clip, me standing beside the ruined roses, explaining why I planted them in the first place. The judge looked at the HOA board and said, "This was never about a violation. This was about power." That moment felt like sunlight after a long storm. The verdict came swiftly. The HOA was ordered to compensate me for damages, reinstate my right to landscape within reasonable limits, and remove Linda from her position pending further review. When it was over, I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than I had in years. Reporters waited outside, asking how it felt to win. I told them, it's not about winning. It's about standing up when someone tries to take away the small things that make life beautiful. In the weeks that followed, neighbors began to open up. The same people who once stayed silent now shared their stories. Fences repainted, decorations removed, flags banned. Together, we formed a new committee, one that valued individuality and compassion over uniformity and fear. And then, one Saturday morning, they all showed up at my yard, shovels, gloves, and potted flowers in hand. We rebuilt the garden. When it was over, I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than I had in years. Reporters waited outside, asking how it felt to win. I told them, it's not about winning. It's about standing up when someone tries to take away the small things that make life beautiful. In the weeks that followed, neighbors began to open up. The same people who once stayed silent now shared their stories. Fences repainted, decorations removed, flags banned. Together, we formed a new committee, one that valued individuality and compassion over uniformity and fear. And then, one Saturday morning, they all showed up at my yard, shovels, gloves, and potted flowers in hand. We rebuilt the garden.